Hey, welcome to Masechet Nazir. Today we're going to be learning Nazir Daf Bet. Welcome to all new learners that are here with us today. Welcome to all those returning. Mazal tov to all those who just finished, and even those who haven't yet finished and are still planning to finish Nidarim. You're almost there, hopefully, and glad that you're starting. Masechet Nazir is sponsored by the family of Rabbi Howard Alpert, Harav Tzvi Lipa Ben Hillel, in honor of his first year at site. Our father helped guide thousands of college students toward lives of Torah in his 4 decades of work as a Hillel professional. He instilled in his children an appreciation for Torah and its values while encouraging each of us to find meaning in our personal Jewish journeys. Thank you for the dedication. And we're going to get started with our Masechet. So I've mentioned before, but I'll mention again in case you're just starting today. On our website, you can always find it on the homepage. There's Beyond the Daf, and there's extra materials that are there. If you're part of our WhatsApp groups, you'll get the links to them as well. We have there 2 introductory articles for Nazir. They're both articles, written articles. One is by Ita Neufeld, and one is by Shuli Mishkin, Flashback, which is her regular weekly column. One is about general introduction material to Nazir, and the other is more about Nazir from kind of a different perspective, specifically focusing on the Nazir, who was a Nazir who lived in our time, and interesting to, or a little earlier, but interesting to read about. So with that, we'll also, Bezrat Hashem, hopefully in the next day or two, Dr. Ayelet Lipson's intro, which is a video intro, will be up on the site with basic introductory materials. Okay, I'm going to start off with a little bit of an introduction. It's hard not to introduce our topic. So we'll start with what is a Nazir. I'll go through a few basics in case this idea is the concept of a Nazir is a little new to you. You can always read up in chapter 6 of Bamidbar, where it talks all about a Nazir. So a Nazir is someone who has someone who expressed in words, which is why seemingly, although we'll talk about it later today, why this appears here. Seems to be a type of vow. So once you get vows into Seder Nashim, you're going to add Nizirut, which is not only a vow, but the main type of vow that possibly people made. It's definitely likely, there's indicators here and there, that it's very likely one of the more common vows that people made was to be a Nazir. And then, again, much less common in our time, but then it was. Nazir cannot drink wine, and then as a result, all sorts of grapes, etc., things like that. The Rambam actually, we're going to see 3 main things, but the Rambam counts it as 8 separate mitzvot lo ta'aseh, okay, in his counting of the mitzvot, and 2 positive commandments. So there's no drinking wine, no eating grapes, and things like that. And he breaks down all the parts into a separate mitzvah, which is very interesting. Then we have can't become impure to dead people, and has to grow his hair long. Then, at the end of the process, the Nazir goes through 3 sacrifices. I committed to myself yesterday that I'm going to memorize this by heart. Okay, all the different sacrifices he has to bring. Okay, there's a keves leolah, kivsa lechatat, and an ayil leshlamim. Okay, so we have 3 korbanot, olah, chatat, and shlamim, and a different animal is brought for each one. Then, in the event, okay, now what he does is the el shlamim, this ram offering, is a unique offering where it's cooked the meat in the temple, and he takes his hair that he shaves off at the end of the process after growing the hair, burns it in the fire that cooks the meat. It's a very interesting ceremony. And that's the track of a Nazir. In the event that he becomes impure to a dead person, which he's not supposed to, so then he has a different 3 korbanot he's supposed to bring. Okay, it's a bird, 2 bird offerings we're going to mention today in class, which is an olah and chatat, a pair of birds for 1 olah, 1 chatat. We see those pairs of birds a lot. The whole Masechet kinuyim we're going to get to much later on in the cycle. And a cane is a nest, a pair of birds. It's all about these bird offerings, a crazy mathematical Masechet. We're actually just the mishnayot are part of the Daf Yomi cycle. Anyway, that's for much later. And along with that, he brings a korban asham, a guilt offering, which is a keves offering. Okay, now, so there's 2 tracks. He either gets off track because he becomes impure to a dead person, and then he actually has to start the count all over, or he goes on the regular track, or he gets off the track and then goes back on the regular track, starts his count from the beginning, and then brings the regular. So that's the standard path of a Nazir. We're going to learn later, soon, in the next few days, about all of different types of Nazirut, how long do they last, what are different types. You could be a Nazir Shimshon, you could be a Nazir Olam, you could be a Nazir Olam meaning forever. You could be a Nazir for a particular period of time. What exactly Nazir Shimshon is, we will get to that. So there's different types of Nazirim. And what else? Okay, so that's a lot of background information. But the real interesting background information I wanted to make sure to get to, again, you know me, I'm not, or those who know me, I'm not big on introductory material because I know that whatever I tell you right now, you will likely forget and you'll only remember once we get there. So I don't like to spend too much time on it. However, being that we were already in Masechet Nidarim, or at least if you did finish Masechet Nidarim with us, a lot of the themes of Nidarim appear in Nazir. And one of the basic questions, and this is interesting to see in the Rambam ends, the Rambam has what's called Sefer Hafla'ah, which is the book of words, of expressions. Okay, and in that he has the vows and he has the Nizirim, the Nizirut. So at the end of both sections, the very last halacha in Hilchot Nidarim and the very last halacha in Hilchot Nizirut, he gives his philosophy, okay? And this is common to the Rambam. When he ends a section, often he brings something more philosophical. So, right, the Rambam was known to be very philosophical, but in the Mishnah Torah, you don't see as much the philosophy, but here you do. So at the very end of Nidarim, he says the following, and this very much matches what we talked about at the Siyum. Amru Chachamim, kol hanodel ki'ilu bana bama. So the rabbi said, anybody who vows is like building an altar outside the temple, which is forbidden. V'im'avar v'nadar mitzvah lihisha'el al nidro. And if you went against it, it's a mitzvah to get rid of your neder, dissolve it. So that you won't fall into some obstacle, right? You'll forget to keep your vow and go against it. But then he adds, in what case is this? That's if you're forbidding something to yourself. But if you make a vow to sanctify something or to dedicate something, mitzvah lekaiman v'lo yish'al aleihem ela midocha. It's a mitzvah to keep them, and you shouldn't get rid of them unless you're really forced to. So the Rambam, while he's against vows, he does point out, though, that there's two different types of vows. And likewise, he says the exact same thing, but even stronger in Hilchot Nizirut. So the last halach in Hilchot Nizirut, he says, I'm going to just translate it into English and not read and translate, but he says, if I say I'm going to be a Nazir, if I do the following, or if I don't do the following, and it's a way of trying to keep yourself in, right? This is like a Nidrei Isal. He says, if you do Nizirut in that way, he says, Harei ze rasha. He even goes much farther than he does in Masechet Nidarim. He says, you're an evil person if you've done this thing. And he says, and that is min Nizirut harishaim. Okay, this is a bad thing to say. If I do this, or right, if I don't drink wine, then, right, or if I drink wine, then I'm going to become a Nazir, because that's, then I can't control myself. It's a way of trying to control yourself. This very much connects with what Dr. Rabbanit Adina Stern talked about yesterday in her talk about using these vows for those type of things. Aval hanoder laHashem derech kedusha. But if you do it in a holy way, this is na'el shubach. It's a good thing to do. And then he quotes two verses, which we're going to see in a minute, quoted by the Ramban, who actually takes a different approach than the Rambam. So hold off 1 minute on that, but we'll get to the Ramban. But the Rambam says, number one, the Torah actually says, Kadosh hu laHashem. When it talks about Nizirut, it says he has the Nezer Elohim al Rosho, he has the crown of God on his head, and he is sanctified. So it must be a good thing. And the Psukim in Amos, it says, Akimi b'nechem l'nevi'im u'b'necharuchem l'nizirim. There's a parallel here between I'm going to make your sons into prophets and your young ones into Nizirim. And from there, you see this, that you can't, and that's the problem. You can't say based on these verses, it's a bad thing. We're putting them on the level of prophets. That makes it look like a very positive thing. And in fact, before we finish with the Rambam, in Hilchot De'ot, where the Rambam does get a little more philosophical than in the Mishnah Torah, okay, than in Hilchot, in the basic halachot, but Hilchot De'ot, which is more the Rambam's philosophy in Mishnah Torah, he says there, the beginning of chapter 3, he says you shouldn't say that since jealousy and desires and respect and all these are bad, because they're bad, I should stay as far away from them as possible so that I won't eat meat, I won't drink wine, I won't get married. He basically says abstention is not a Jewish value. And he says, I won't live in a nice house. I won't wear nice clothing. I'm just going to wear sackcloth on me. And and all that, or hard wool. And he says, like the priests of the pagans, this is a derech ra'ah v'asur le'lecha. And what's his proof? The Nazir. He says, and he takes a different verse that he didn't mention before. He says, if you go this way, you're considered a sinner, as it says by Nazir v'chiper alav me'asher chata ala nefesh. And that's the verse where anyone who goes negative about the Nazir takes this verse, and we're going to see it inside very shortly, not today, but tomorrow, about the fact that a Nazir in the Torah, there's a pasuk that says the Nazir sinned. And where did the Nazir sin? Now it happens, the context of that pasuk is actually by a Nazir who becomes impure to a dead person, which actually makes sense. On the other hand, some people take it to talk about a Nazir in general, and not just one who became impure to a dead person. And their basis for that is, if you remember, I told you they bring sacrifices. Even a regular Nazir brings a sin offering. Why does a Nazir bring a sin offering, right? We have the same question by the woman who gives birth. So some people view it as it's a sin. And the Rambam says, why is it a sin? Because this goes against Jewish values. It's not what we believe in. So that's the Rambam. The Ramban, on the other hand, now everyone has to deal with, it's on the one hand, there's psukim that are very positive. On the other, it's kadosh yeh, and the Nazirim and the Nevi'im. On the other hand, we have this sin. What's the sin for? Or even if you think the sin is just about one thing, at least you have the problem, what just about if you become impure, you have the problem, it's still you bring a sin offering. So the Ramban says the following, and this is the Ramban on his commentary on the psukim. He says the following. The reason he brings a chatat, again, I'm just going to translate into English, is not explainable. He says, we don't know. It's not explained in the Torah. We don't know why. But he says it seems that what's his sin? He says, very interesting. The Nazir has gotten to a very high level while he's a Nazir, to the extent that he could almost be a prophet. Or he's compared to the prophets. When he comes back to the world, to the regular world, that's when he has to bring a chatat. He says it's kol yemei nizro kadosh hu LaHashem. All his days he's sanctified. That's what the pasuk says. V'hine hu tzarich kapara b'shuvo lihitameh b'ta'avot ha'olam. As he's coming down from his high level and he has to come back down into the world, that's when he needs atonement, because it's going to be very hard to land back on earth after being in that state of a Nazir. And that's the sin. So it's not really necessarily a sin, but it is atonement for what's going to be, which is very interesting. Usually we atone for something of the past. And this is that moment of going back into this world. That's when the sin issue comes into play, because he's going back. He's removed himself from desires and sin, and now he's going back to a world where there's going to be sin around, and he's not going to be on that high level anymore. So the Ramban views this as a very positive thing. Yes, the Ramban is in Parshat Naso. See if it's probably on, Pasuk Yud Aleph, where it says Me'asher Chata ala Nefesh. I think it's on that Pasuk, somewhere right around there. So basically, we end up with this very interesting debate about how we view Nazir, and we're going to see the different debates in the Gemara itself, which is also where the Rambam and the Ramban go off on. In the Gemara, they don't explain it as well as they talk about it here, and that's why I wanted to bring it, and just to go into the Masechet having an understanding that we're not exactly sure how to view this Nazir. And we'll actually end our daf with a little bit of that. Starting now with our Masechet. Kol kinuyim nizirut kinizirut. So the first thing we're getting to, and perhaps it's chronological. Why is it chronological? We've seen that mishnayot go chronologically. For example, Pesach, right? We started with B'dika Chametz, and we end with Seder night, right? Because all along we're getting to the sacrifices they did in the middle on the day of Erev Pesach, and then until we finally get to finishing with the Seder night. On Yoma, we saw the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippurim. We get to where he started a week before. They separate him from his wife, etc. And it all went chronologically. Here, we have to start with when the Nazir takes upon Nazirut. Then we can get into, okay, what happens when he is a Nazir? So the first thing we start with is, how do you express to be a Nazir? Without saying the obvious is you say, Hareini Nazir. And the fact is, because it says in the Torah, Ki yafli lindor neder Nazir, which means you have to express, it has to be expressed. You can't just think in my mind, I want to be a Nazir and be a Nazir. You have to have an expression that says, I want to be a Nazir. What if your expression is not the word Nazir, but something similar, a word that's used synonymously with Nazir, or we'll talk about exactly what kinuyim are in a minute. Or a yad. A yad is from the word handle in Hebrew, which means it's incomplete. The handle by itself is missing the main part. So sometimes you could have a statement that's incomplete and it's missing the main part, but it's clear what you mean, or that's going to be partly the question. How clear does it have to be what you mean in order to be considered that you're a Nazir? So the Mishna starts off with kinuyim, and it's exactly how we started with Masechet Nedarim, and a lot of this sugya is going to be parallel to there with a bunch of differences, and we'll try to highlight the differences as we get to them. If you want some extra homework, you can look back at the first half of Nedarim and compare the two more carefully. So it starts off with any word that's like nizirut will be considered nizirut. Ha'omer ehe, if I say I will be, now this already is a yad. So we didn't even mention yadot, but they're already on a yad because this isn't a word. Ehe means I will be. That's not a synonymous word for Nazir. It's not a unique word at all. It's just I will be. But if you say I will be, that's what's called a yad. It's cut off. You're missing. It's an intimation. We assume what you mean is I'm going to be a Nazir. It's very strange. A lot of things about this mission are going to be very strange. We're going to have to understand them better when we get to the Gemara. Harei ze Nazir. You're a Nazir. Oh, ehe na'eh. Or you say I want to be beautiful. Also, you're a Nazir. Nazir. If you say nazik, naziach, paziach, now we move back to kinuyim. So we started with kinuyim. We went to yadot. Now we're back to kinuyim and describing what's a kinuy. Nazik, naziach, paziach, harei ze Nazir. Those are words that are used synonymously with Nazir. Seems a little strange. If you remember, we had a whole debate. Are they words that Gentiles use to mean that? And we're saying if you use a word that Gentiles use, that is considered the same. Or are they words that the rabbis made up, which makes sense if you look at these strange words, they're not really words, right? Maybe they're words that the rabbis made up because they didn't want to use the actual words. We had a whole discussion of this in the beginning of Nedarim. Next option, Hareini kazeh, I will be like this. Hareini misalsel. Okay, misalsel, we're going to see Hareini mechalkel. These words are going to connect to someone's hair. Harei alai l'shalech pera, which is the word used in the Torah for growing your hair long for the Nazir. I'm growing my hair long. Harei ze Nazir. Harei alai tziporim, I want to bring birds. Now remember, the bird offering was the offering you bring when you become impure to a dead person by accident when you're a Nazir. So if you say, I'm going to bring birds, Rabbi Meir omer Nazir, Chachamim omrim no Nazir. Here we have a debate. That's already, whether the birds have to do with a Nazir or not is already questionable, and there's a debate about this. Again, we'll go into more detail when the Gemara gets to it. The first question the Gemara asks, which I didn't deal with in our intro because it's going to be dealt with right here, is the Gemara asks, and this is the sugya that, first of all, the wording matches exactly the first sugya in Brachot. You might remember the sugya starts off there, when do we read Shema in the evening? And the Gemara asks, where is the Tana standing when he starts talking about when do we say Shema? What about, how do we even know that you're supposed to say Shema at night? And then the Gemara answers, oh, he's relying on a pasuk that says, B'shachbecha uvkumecha. When you go to sleep and when you wake up, these things should be on your heart, etc. So the exact same wording is used here, but it's a different type of question. It's asking, Michte Tana b'Seder Nashim kai. You know, the Tana is in Seder Nashim. My time Atane Nazir. Why did they put Nazir here in the middle of Seder Nashim? Right? The question we always like to ask that the Gemara almost never asks, what's this Masechet doing here? Who decided on this order and for what reason? So, and this is generally this type of sugyot that we're going to see. Then they're going to talk about the order, the ABBA structure in our Mishnah. These are generally Sfora'is sugyot. They're not typical Amoraim sugyot. They're sugyot that come the time period after the Amoraim, which is after the year 500, when Rav Ashi and Ravina kind of sealed the Gemara and finished it off, edited it. Then they started asking all sorts of other type questions, and they usually appear without a name. Anyway, we say now, the Tana is in Seder Nashim. Why did he add Masechet Nazir? Why is it here? To which the Gemara answers, Tana akrakai. He was referring to psukim. Now the answer becomes a little bit complicated because the first pasuk they're going to quote is about gitin, divorce. And then the next thing they're going to talk about is the sotah. How they get from divorce to sotah is a little bit disjointed, but we're going to read this anyway. A man in the Torah, describes a man if he takes a woman to be his wife, and then he doesn't like her anymore because he finds some ervat davar. She was engaged in maybe illicit sexual behavior with somebody else, even though you can divorce for other reasons, but that's the way it says it in the Torah. There's a whole debate about on what basis you can divorce your wife. Wait for gitin for that. Mi garam la avera. Now they say the following: what caused her to sin that she did this ervat davar? And now we're kind of moving into the sotah, which is a woman who really went off and slept with somebody else. Yayin, it's wine. V'ka'amal, and it said, Kol ha'ro'eh sotah b'kilkula yazir atzmo min hayayin. And then they say, and this is very famous because this comes up also, why is Nazir and sotah next to each other in the Torah? In Perek Hey, it's actually interesting, it's the reverse order. Chapter 5 is the sotah. Chapter 6 is the Nazir. Here it's the reverse order, although I will tell you that in the Yerushalmi, the order is different. And there's difference between different versions of the Yerushalmi about where the order is. Some people have it after Gitin, which also makes sense in terms of connecting this pasuk to get. Some people have it after sotah. There's a bit of a different order going on here. It's not so clear that the order that we have is the only order there was, but it's the order here. And they say, if you see a sotah, a woman who's cheated on her husband, your reaction, your gut reaction is going to be, I'm going to keep myself away from wine so that doesn't happen to me. Okay, because the assumption is that wine is what caused the sin. It's a drasha, okay, and it's a way of connecting these. Obviously, there's many other reasons to connect it. The main reason is to say, well, once Nidarim got in there, which again, we had questions why Nidarim is here, but once Nidarim is here, Nazir is a type of Nidar, and as I said, possibly one of the main types of vows that were made at the time. So then it's just kind of an addendum, an added end to Masechet Nidarim. But here we have a drasha about the connection. Now we're going to get to the structure of the Mishnah. The Mishnah starts with kinui, then starts explaining yadot, and doesn't even say anything about the word yadot. The word yadot doesn't appear in the Mishnah. So Rava or someone else says it. We did the exact same thing in Nidarim. It's missing words, and this is how it should read. All kinuyim are considered a complete statement, and an incomplete statement is also considered a complete statement. Basically, right, we're going to say, you use a kinuy, you use a yad, you can become a nazir. Ve'elu hein yadot, and then it says, and here are some examples of yadot. If I say, I will be, then you're a nazir. And then it goes back to kinuyim. To which the Gemara asks, okay, that's A, B, B, A structure. We started with A, we went to B, then we went back to B, back to A. By the way, the beginning of Masechet Brachot does the same thing. It says, when do we read Shema at night? Then it says, when do we read Shema in the morning? And then it says, how many brachot are in Shema in the morning and how many brachot are in Shema at night? And the Gemara also there talks about the structure. So here also, and we had the same thing in Nidarim, so why didn't it do A, B, A, B? If it started with kinuyim, why didn't it describe kinuyim in detail then? And then go back to yadot. So they say, wherever he left off, that's where he began. So he started with A, he went to B, he was already in B, he continues to explain B and moves back to A. Sounds like a reasonable explanation. To which the Gemara says, and here we're going to show you some examples. Kititznan. And we're going to have the same examples we had in Nidarim. What oils can be used for lighting Shabbos candles and which oils can't we use? That's the intro to the second chapter of Shabbat. And then they say, and then they start saying, don't light with these oils, blah, 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 blah. Do light with these oils. So it's the ABBA structure. Very good. We have some proofs. Next one. People used to wrap their food to keep it warm. In what type of materials can you wrap your food to keep it warm on Shabbat? And in what materials is it forbidden to do that? And Mufaresh Ein Tomnim Beresh, it starts off with what you can't. What can a woman walk out with that will be considered will be considered carrying on Shabbat? And what can she walk out with that will not be considered carrying? What can she walk out with wearing that will be considered carrying and will be forbidden to her to do on Shabbat? And then it explains, lo tetzei isha bereisha. And then it starts explaining the things she can't wear. So again, A, B, B, A. Perfect. So there we've proven it. This is something the Mishnah generally does. But if you remember Masechet Nazir, Nidarim, you'll know that, wait, but there's all these others that don't fit in with that. The Hadran, doesn't it say in the Mishnah, but right next to that chapter is a chapter about what an animal can go out wearing. There's something called Shvitat Behemot, which is animals also can't do work on Shabbat, and therefore animals also can't carry things that are considered carrying. So what can an animal wear? Again, the whole issue here is what's considered part of your clothing and what's considered things that are extra. They're not clothing that are adornments that you shouldn't be wearing. So, or however we did, really more like a burden, okay? Like they're carrying something for the sake of carrying it. So what can an animal go out with? What can they not go out with? And notice what it starts with. Umefaresh yotze gamal beresha. A camel goes out wearing this. So now you see that's A, B, A, B. It started what an animal go out with and what can't an animal go out with. And then it starts explaining an animal can go out with this. And then it says an animal can't go out with that. And yesh nochalin u'manchilim, nochalin v'lo manchilim, manchilim v'lo nochalim, nochalin v'lo manchilim. Now we're going to have one with 4, and it's going to be A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. So there you're also going to have an exception to the rule. And in Masechet Nedarim, we brought a number of those with 4. Okay, this one is, there are some people who pass on inheritance to, who nochalim, they inherit from someone else, like a father's son, a son inherits from his father, and right, if the father dies, and manchilim, if the son dies, it goes to his father. So it goes in both directions. There are some people who nochalim below manchilim, and then we have all these different options, like for example, a woman and her husband. The woman passes on her inheritance to her husband if she dies. But if the husband dies, it goes to his sons and not to his wife. So that's, right, there's different ones. And then there's people who don't inherit at all, like brothers from the mother. They share the same mother, not the same father. They don't inherit each other at all, not either direction. So there's all different options and permutations there. I'm not going to get into all those laws. But mifarish elu nochalinu manchilim bereisha. Then it goes back to category number 1, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. So we now have 2 examples. And like I told you, in Nedarim, there were many more that don't do A, B, B, A. So now we're stuck. To which we have this first strange line, which some people actually don't even have in their version of the text because it doesn't make so much sense, but we'll read it anyway, and we'll explain how you could somewhat make sense of it. You could say sometimes the Mishnah chooses this way of doing it, and sometimes the Mishnah chooses that way. If that's really that sentence is there, then you don't really need to go on after that, which is why it seems strange that the Gemara is now going to give reasons as to why the order is the way it is. So some people say, get rid of this. This doesn't really belong here. And by the way, it was one of the answers given in Nidarim. It could be it got here by accident because of that. Or it could be that they're offering alternative suggestions. Either you could say it's really random, arbitrary, sometimes this, sometimes that. But in any case, they continue now to give other reasons. Elahatam di isura denafshehu. Now they're focusing on the Masechet Shabbat cases, the one that work ABBA versus the Behema, which is ABAB. So they're going to distinguish. Hatam di isura denafshehu. There, it's a person doing something wrong. If you light with the wrong oils, or you heat up your food in the wrong way, or you walk out to the public domain with wearing something that's problematic, that's, first of all, it's Shabbat, which is serious, and it's a isur on the person. Mifaresh isur dinafshe beresha. So they want to know that you might not stay till the end. So basically, let's tell you right up front, in case you don't continue, what you can't do so that you avoid doing it. But gabe behema, when it comes to an animal, the isura ade behema udaate. It's just my animal doing something wrong. Yes, it's forbidden for my animal to do work on Shabbat, but it's not me. It's not as severe as if I did something myself. So therefore, mefarish hatera beresha. It's almost like the default is just to do ABAB. It's when we have a reason to change because we want to make sure you get what's wrong first. So they start detailing what's wrong. And that's when it's on the person rather than the animal. Now, obviously, that reason has nothing to do with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is comparing 2 things that if you say them, you will be a Nazir. It's not like one is, right? It's not like one is permitted and one is forbidden. So it wouldn't really apply here. I'm a bet now. We're starting now on the 2nd page. Gabe yesh nochalim nami. Now, it also didn't explain the nochalim ve'en nochalim. That's not forbidden, permitted, isur on a person or isur on an animal. It should have been, right? According to what we said. So yesh nochalim, it's mifarish. Now we're going to give a different reason for this one. Mifarish ikar nachala beresha. If you're going to say there's cases where this will happen and this will happen, and then there's some cases where this will happen, but that won't happen, and that will happen, but that won't happen. First, you want to give the basic case of how laws of inheritance work. Father to son, son to father. Then you could start talking about all these exceptions to the rule. It doesn't make sense if you don't give the basics first. So therefore, they wanted to give the ikar nachala first. So that explains the Shabbos cases. It explains the yesh nochalim. But what about our case? Where does our case fit in? It's not like we said isurim. It's not like there's an ikar and then you want to get to something less central. So they say, according to that, so either, there's two ways to read this. Either you say, well, maybe kinuyim is more ikar because it's more like synonymous with Nazir, and yadot are secondary because they're less expressive, less of an expression. And maybe it should have talked about kinuyim first and then yadot based on the explanation we just gave. Or perhaps they're saying neither of these apply to Nazir, to our Mishnah. And therefore, why don't you just keep it the way you would? What's the default? The default, without having any other reason, is just keep it A, B, A, B, because that would be the more normal way to do it. So therefore, they're back to square one, which is we have all these explanations, which again, you could split it into two or three. You could say either, number one, it's really a little bit random. Number two, well, when you're talking about person versus animal, right? The person itself, if it's forbidden, we're going to start with that. Animal, we don't really care, so we'll put the permitted at the beginning. And when there's something that's more basic and then an outgrowth of that, so we're going to start with the basic and then go to the outgrowth. So now they say, so what about by us? To which they now bring a different answer. And this is an answer, okay, all the answers we saw so far, other than it's a bit random, arbitrary, all the other answers weren't in Nidarim. Nidarim had other answers. But now we get to an answer we had in Nidarim. Elahainu tama yadot, ho'il ba'atel midrasha chavivim lei. Because yadot was learned out from a drasha, the whole source for yadot is learned out from a drasha in the pasuk. And when the rabbis learn something from a drasha, it's something they learned on their own. It's very exciting to them. Because of that, they wanted to put that first because it excited them. So then they say, well, if it excited them so much, and we ask the same question in Nidarim, v'liftach b'hom bereisha. So why didn't we start with that? In other words, start your Mishnah with kol yadot nidarim kinidarim. Kinuyim, yadot nizirut kinizirut, and kinuyim nizirut, right? Then do A, B, but starting with yadot, if that was so much important to them. To which the Gemara says, well, it's a bit of both. Tana ki matchil be'ikar korban. Ulinyan perushe mefaresh yadot bereisha. Again, this is what I suggested before, which is kinuyim are really more central. First of all, they're probably more common that people would use some alternative word rather than just say, I will be. And also, they're more solid. Start with that first, then move to yadot. But when it comes to explaining them, let's start explaining yadot first because they're beloved to us because we learned them out from a drasha. And then go back to kinuyim. And with that, we finish that section and we've explained the order in our Mishnah, which, as I said, is not such a central, it's not a typical type of sugya. And this is why the beginning of a sector often have these atypical sugyot. It's more about the structure of, first we started with where is Nazir in this, in Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, right, in the order of the mishnayot. And where is, right, because it's actually questioning the Mishnah, not the Gemara, why the Mishnah, the author of the Mishnah put it here. And then we had this question about the order of the Mishnah itself, the ABBA structure. Now we're going to get more into the content. Ha'omer ehei hareza nazir. If you say, behold, I am, or something like that, I will be, you're a Nazir. It's a very strange thing, to which the Gemara says, Dilma ehei b'ta'anit ka'amar. Maybe you're saying, I will be in a fast. Okay? It could be, they use this as an example for any possibility it could have been. Or maybe that was typical in those days that somebody would say, I will be. It was either I will be in a fast or I will be a Nazir. Hard to know. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel comes with an answer. His type of answer is to say, the Mishnah didn't tell us the whole story. And we're not talking about anyone who says the words I will be. We call this a type of answer called an ukimta. It's when the Mishnah doesn't make sense to an Amora. He says, it must be missing details. And what it really means is the following. It's only in a particular case. It would have to be that there was some more proof that he meant Nazir or she meant Nazir, which is, I can't remember, I don't think I said this in class, by the way, but I think I said it in the Hebrew. Now I'm confused because I just taught that before this class. But the Torah says, by the way, Isha, just to make it clear, if anyone asks, can a woman be a Nazir? It says it explicitly in the Torah that a woman can be a Nazir also. It says Isha, either a man or a woman who decides to be a Nazir. So Shmuel says, I was walking on the street, I see a Nazir, and I say, I will be. Because the Nazir is walking by, I'm obviously referring to that Nazir, and that is a declaration, I will be a Nazir. To which the Gemara says, and there's from here till the end of this section, there's many different ways of reading this, or from here till the next few lines, there's a bunch of different ways of reading this, but we're going to go with This also gives me an opportunity to explain to you that Rashi here, the inner column, is not actually Rashi. Most people think it's the Rivan, his son-in-law, and we'll call him the Mifaresh, like we did in the commentary, like we did in Nidarim, same thing. The Gemara asks, and we're going to explain it the way he explains this sugya, which is, can we infer from here that Shmuel thinks that if you have an unclear yad, for example, which would be what? Just saying the word ahay without a Nazir going by, because he says it has to be a Nazir was walking by, he would think that if I just said I will be, that doesn't work. Lo having yadayim. Now, why do we care whether he says this or not? So some people think it's just maybe we can understand what he holds on a different sugya based on this, which is often what the Gemara does. The Mefarish points out, though, that there's a sugya in Kiddushin where he says if you say harat mikudeshet, you're betrothed, without saying to me, it's a betrothal, according to Shmuel. And that's called the yad she'eino muchach, because muchach, it's an unproven case. Why is it unproven? Because you didn't say to me. Maybe he means he's betrothing her to somebody else. You could do that. You could be a messenger for someone's betrothal. And yet Shmuel says it works. And he's basically comparing that to the case of a hey. It's also the same thing. You don't really know what they mean. To which the Gemara answers, and again, there's different versions to this, just so you know, but I'm reading in a particular way. You already see there's an aleph and a bet. If you're using a regular Gemara, they send you off to the Bach who edits it and tells you there's different versions. In any case, we'll read it in one particular version. Amre bisman shenazir ober lefanav leika l'sipuke b'milta acharina. When a Nazir is walking in front of you, that's more similar. Okay, now the Gemara doesn't talk about this case in Kiddushin, but the way the Mefarish explains it, that's more similar to harat mikudeshet without the word to me, because it's pretty clear. There's not much room for error here. Let's say 90% chance that you're going to do this, right? That you mean a Nazir. 90% chance you meant to betroth this woman to yourself. Aval, and I'm skipping the word vadai here, ein Nazir over lefanav amrin and dilmei hebetani kamar. When it's 50-50, or when it's who knows what it is, that already is not even a yad she'eino muchach, right? We're going to have levels. There's totally unclear, and then there's somewhat unclear, right? Not fully clear, but close to clear. So again, there's a huge debate among the commentaries exactly how you define each of these cases and how then you could take this to other cases as well. And that obviously has huge ramifications, but basically it seems this could still be called a yad she'eino muchach that works. And the case of a hey without anything is not even a yad she'eino muchach. Okay, it's not even at that level. To which the Gemara says, okay, so Shmuel's got it. There's a Nazir going by. By the way, the Mefarish adds something else also, which is very important, which is he says that it's also by Nazirut, you need specifically a hafla'ah. And it could be that for Nazir, you have different criteria than you have for Kiddushin. And maybe that's his distinction. That's a whole other thing. I don't want to get into all the detail. Now the Gemara says, okay, so your Nazir is walking by, you say, I will be. Maybe you could still mean something else. Maybe you mean, I want to exempt him from the sacrifice, meaning I'll be his sponsor for the sacrifice. So I'll pay for them. Maybe I'll take them to the temple for him. Maybe that's what he means. I will be for you, your sponsor. And he's referring to the Nazir, but he doesn't mean I will be myself a Nazir. To which the Gemara says, Dika Amar Bilibo. Again, we're going to have to define it. Well, redefine. It's a case where the Nazir was walking by. I said, hey, and I thought in my heart, I'm going to be a Nazir. Now, thinking in your heart doesn't generally mean enough. But if all these things were happening at the same time, right, I did express. So, right, if I just think I'm going to be a Nazir, I'm not a Nazir. I have to express it. But if the Nazir was walking, I said, I will be, and I thought in my heart, I want to be a Nazir, then it works. To which the Gemara says, well, who's arguing with this? Obviously, you're going to be a Nazir. To which the Gemara says, you might have thought that you need to have your heart and your words be the same, that your words have to express what you're thinking in your heart, because we know from other sugyot, things I think in my heart aren't real. This comes to teach you that, now it would seem to say that you don't, which is very weird because you do. So many of the commentators say what it comes to teach you is this case is okay because your lave is not going against what your heart says, right? Your heart is not going against what your words are. Your words are leaving a little open to interpretation. What you have in your heart is just clarifying that. So basically, it's close enough to pibuli bo shavim. Some people say because there was an action of the Nazir walking by. Some people say it's because your words, you said I will be. And we assume, right, the chances that you meant korban are very slim. Okay. So anyway, there's a few different ways to understand that, but it seems to be sufficient that you do, right? Again, there's this person walking by, you say I will be, and you think in your heart, I'm going to be a Nazir, then for sure you're a Nazir. Okay, and then we don't have any safek about what else it would be. The Rosh points out, okay, the Perush HaRosh is kind of central here because he ends up on our page. Usually the Rosh is not on the page. Many people use him a lot in learning in Nazir. He says two things about if you're a Nazir, misafek, what's the problem? So, if you're not sure, maybe I'll be Batani. Why was the Gemara so bothered by this? He says two important points. One is you end up bringing sacrifices, and you're bringing sacrifices and you're actually not obligated, and that's a huge problem. It's called bringing chulin to the azara. You're not allowed to do that, non-sacred items. Number two, there's a rule that safek nazirut lekula. If you're not sure about nazirut, you go leniently, and this would not follow that halachic principle. Last section for today. Hey na'eh, Nazir. If you say I will be beautiful, you're a Nazir. To which the Gemara says, V'dilma en elefanav b'mitzvot. Maybe you want to say, I want to beautify myself with mitzvot. Kidditanya, as it says in the following brayta, Ze eli va'amveu. This is my God, and I will beautify him. What does that mean? En elefanav b'mitzvot. I will do mitzvot in a beautiful manner. I'll have the nicest sukkah in the community. Lulav na'el, make sure to get the most beautiful lulav. Seat na'el, buy the nicest seat. I'll make a beautiful sefer Torah and I will put on beautiful silk. Amar Shmuel, shetafpus b'sa'aro. Shmuel says again, it must be we're missing something here, which is he's holding his hair at the same time. Okay, so therefore, we're not going to say, thank you for pointing that. I should have said it in the words, hidor mitzvah, right? The option was to say, why don't I say I'm doing a hidor mitzvah, the mitzvah in the most beautiful way possible? No, I'm holding my hair and I say, I want to be beautiful. What does that mean? I want my hair to grow long. That's beautiful. So as you were holding your hair, you said it, which means it's clear you're talking about being a Nazir, to which we're going to end with this very fascinating question. Nazira brings us back to where we started today. Nazira milta da avera va'amrina le'na'eh. How could you say I want to make myself beautiful when making yourself beautiful involves a sin? Because it's a sin to be a Nazir. We're going to have to say, how does the Rambam read this, right? But according to the way we read the Rambam, again, the Rambam comes way after the Gemara. We're going to have to read it in the Gemara and see what the Gemara is saying. And that we're going to get into tomorrow, where they get this from. But since it's a sin to become a Nazir, how could you possibly say, I want to be beautiful, to do as if, right? Now, beauty means two things here. Beauty means physical beauty. I'm going to grow my hair long, but it also means doing a mitzvah. It doesn't exactly mean hidor mitzvah there, but really what you're saying is beautiful all around. And this is a sin. You can't call a sin beautiful, even if maybe you'll look beautiful, if it's a sin. So we're left with this question. We start already on the first page of the Gemara, and we end with, in the middle right there, of it's a sin to become a Nazir. So stay tuned till tomorrow to hear more about this, where they get this from. Again, I gave you some hints already to it from before, but we're going to talk about this head on already, right from the beginning of the Masechet. So welcome to Masechet Nazir. What we did today was we dealt with, number one, why is Nazir in this Masechet, in this Seder Nashim? Then we moved on to what's the order in the Mishnah and why, comparing it to all sorts of other mishnayot. And then we moved into understanding these two first cases, which these yadot seem very far off from what really, there could be multiple possibilities of what you're saying and why we actually think, again, we narrowed the cases of the Mishnah to something much more specific, where you were either holding your hair, a Nazir walked by. It's not the simple reading of the Mishnah, which seemed you just made this very open, ambiguous statement. With that, we'll finish for today, and we'll meet up again tomorrow. Wishing everyone a great day.